The alarm system screamed across the bridge of the Calaxian patrol station. Fleet Admiral Thexular's 4 eyes widened as he stared at the impossible readings on his screen. Something was coming out of the void. For 3,000 years, the Calaxian Empire had ruled the galaxy without challenge. Their scientists had long ago declared the void impassable. It was a region of twisted space where gravity folded in on itself and dimensions collapsed. Ships that entered never returned. The Empire had built its entire defensive strategy around this truth. The void was their wall, their perfect barrier. But now something was breaking through that wall. "Magnify the image," Thexular commanded, his voice steady despite the fear creeping up his spine. The main screen flickered to life. At first, there was nothing but the swirling darkness of the void's edge. Then space itself seemed to tear open like fabric. A massive shape pushed through the wound in reality. It was a ship larger than any patrol vessel, covered in dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "I've never seen that design in any Imperial database," his tactical officer whispered. The vessel was angular and brutal. Where Calaxian ships were smooth and elegant, this thing was all hard edges and weapon ports. It looked like it had been built for one purpose: war. "Hail them," Thexular ordered. "Standard Imperial greeting protocol." The communications officer worked his console, sending signals across every known frequency. There was no response. The dark ship hung in space, silent and menacing. "Send 3 patrol ships to investigate," the Admiral decided. "Tell them to keep their weapons charged but not to fire first. We don't know what we're dealing with." 3 small Calaxian vessels broke formation and moved toward the stranger. Their silver hulls gleamed as they approached in a standard triangular pattern. The formation had been used successfully for centuries. The dark ship's weapon ports opened. There was no warning, no declaration of hostility. The strange vessel simply fired. But these weren't energy beams or plasma bolts that the Empire's shields could deflect. These were physical projectiles moving at speeds that made them nearly invisible. Chunks of metal traveling so fast, they glowed white-hot from friction with the sparse particles of space. The first patrol ship exploded instantly. Its shields, designed to deflect energy weapons, did nothing against solid matter moving at a fraction of light speed. The projectile punched through the hull and detonated everything inside. The second ship tried to evade, but it was too slow. Another projectile tore through its engine section. The ship spun wildly before its reactor went critical, creating a brief new sun in the darkness. The third ship managed to fire back before it died. Its plasma bolts struck the dark vessel's hull and scattered harmlessly across some kind of armor plating. Then that ship too was reduced to glowing debris. Silence fell across the bridge. 15 seconds, 3 ships destroyed, 72 crew members dead. "All ships, battle formation!" Thexular shouted, his calm finally breaking. "Ready all weapons!" But the dark ship was already moving. It accelerated at speeds that should have crushed any crew under impossible G-forces. In moments, it had disappeared into Imperial space, leaving only the wreckage and the horror behind. Hours later, recovery teams picked through what remained of the patrol ships. They found very little. The strange projectiles had been too destructive. But one piece of evidence survived. A fragment of one of the alien projectiles embedded in a chunk of hull plating. The science team studied it under every scanner they possessed. Their report sent shockwaves through the Imperial command structure. "It's depleted uranium," the chief scientist reported, her scales pale with disbelief. "A dense metal, accelerated to relativistic speeds using magnetic rails. It's primitive, brutally simple, and terrifyingly effective against our shielding technology." "Who uses such weapons?" demanded War Master Jalcor, joining the emergency meeting via hologram. The scientist pulled up an old file from the Imperial archives. The security classification was maximum level. The file was 200 years old. Only one species in our records ever favored kinetic weapons over energy-based systems, she said quietly. The humans. The room fell silent. Every officer present knew the story. 2 centuries ago, the expanding Galaxian Empire had encountered humanity. The humans had been young, aggressive, and refused to submit to imperial authority. War had been inevitable. The Purge Wars had lasted 10 years. The Empire had been thorough. Earth, the human homeworld, had been burned from orbit until nothing lived on its surface. Every human colony had been systematically destroyed. Billions had died. The Empire had made an example of humanity. This is what happens to species that resist. Impossible, Jalcor said, though his voice lacked conviction. I personally oversaw the final campaign. There were no survivors. We hunted down every human ship, every colony, every refugee fleet. They are extinct. The scientist brought up another file. During the final battles, long-range sensors detected a human colony fleet fleeing toward the void. They were presumed destroyed when they entered. No ship has ever survived the void. Until now, Thexular said softly. The implications settled over them like a weight. Somewhere in that impossible region of twisted space, humans had survived. They had endured for 200 years in conditions that should have killed them. They had built or rebuilt that monstrous battleship, and now they had emerged. The Empire's perfect defensive barrier had become humanity's shield. The void that protected the Empire from invasion had protected humanity from extermination. Find that ship, Jalcor commanded. I don't care how many vessels it takes. We finished the humans once. We will finish them again. But as the meeting ended, Thexular stared at the footage of the battleship emerging from the void. Something about it filled him with dread. That ship hadn't emerged by accident. It had purpose. And after 200 years of survival against impossible odds, whatever humans crewed that vessel would not be easy to stop. The Empire's worst fear had been realized. They hadn't killed all the humans. And now, from the one place they thought was safe, humanity had returned. The High Council chamber was built to inspire awe. Massive pillars reached toward a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. Holographic displays showed the vastness of the Galaxian Empire. Thousands of worlds, hundreds of species, all bowing to imperial rule. But today, the grandeur felt hollow. Emperor Caxthor sat on his throne, listening to his advisors argue. They had been debating for hours, and still no one could explain how humans still existed. We must verify the archives, insisted High Researcher Volmix. Perhaps the records were incomplete. The records were perfect, Jalcor growled. The old War Master stood rigid, his pride wounded. I was there. I watched Earth burn. I confirmed every colony's destruction personally. Then explain the ship, Volmix shot back. Intelligence Officer Kriash had been silent throughout the debate. She was young for her position, promoted rapidly due to her analytical skills. Now she studied the data on her personal tablet, her mind working through possibilities. Your Majesty, she said quietly. The room fell silent. I request permission to review the classified archives from the Purge Wars, all of them, including sealed sections. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. Granted. Find me answers, Kriash. Real ones. She bowed and left quickly, grateful to escape the political theater. The truth was in the data. It always was. 3 days later, Kriash sat in the deepest level of the Imperial Archives, surrounded by holographic files that hadn't been opened in 2 centuries. Her eyes hurt from reading, but she couldn't stop. There were gaps in the records, small ones, easily overlooked. But they were there. A colony fleet designated Human Fleet 7 had been tracked toward the void. The final report stated, target destroyed upon entering the void. No survivors possible. but there was no sensor data confirming the destruction. No debris recovered, just an assumption that nothing could survive the void. "They didn't destroy you," Kriash whispered to the old records. "They let the void be your grave because they thought it was impossible to survive." She was about to dig deeper when alarms blared across the facility. The human battleship had struck again. This time it was Supply Depot Gamma 7, a massive storage facility on the edge of settled space. Security footage showed the dark vessel emerging from faster-than-light travel dangerously close to the depot, a maneuver that should have been impossible without crashing into the structure. The battleship's weapons fired with precision, not the relativistic projectiles from before, but focused plasma beams, Imperial weapons. The ship had adapted. Storage containers filled with military supplies exploded in brilliant fireballs. Fuel reserves ignited, creating a chain reaction that tore through half the depot. Then, just as Imperial defense forces arrived, the human ship vanished back into faster-than-light travel. 17 minutes from arrival to departure, Kriash noted, studying the attack data. They knew exactly what to hit and how long they had before reinforcements arrived. Over the next 2 weeks, 6 more attacks followed. Each one was different. Communication relays destroyed with missile strikes, an automated mining station disabled by electromagnetic pulses, a patrol base hit with a combination of kinetic and energy weapons that overwhelmed its defenses before anyone could respond. The pattern was clear to Kriash. The humans were testing Imperial defenses, learning what worked and what didn't. Every attack taught them more about how to hurt the Empire. Then came the message. It broadcast across every Imperial frequency simultaneously. Every military vessel, every civilian station, every planetary communication network received it at the same time. The Empire's security protocols were useless against it. The message was simple text, appearing on screens in perfect Galaxian script. 200 years ago, you tried to erase us. You failed. 1 ship survived. 1 ship is all we need. Below it was a designation. UNSC Retribution, Captain Sarah Chen commanding. And below that, an image. It showed a human female, middle-aged by their standards, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that held the weight of centuries. Behind her, Kriash could see the bridge of the human ship. It looked cramped compared to Imperial designs, every surface covered with controls and displays. This was a ship built by people who couldn't afford wasted space. The Empire's response was immediate panic. Stock markets crashed as investors realized trade routes were vulnerable. Planetary governors demanded protection. Conquered species whispered in the streets about the ship that had survived the impossible and returned for revenge. Emperor Caxthor called another emergency session. This time, the tone was different. The arguments were sharper, tinged with fear. "How many humans are aboard that ship?" the Emperor demanded. Kriash had done the calculations. Based on the ship's size and similar human vessel designs from before the Purge, approximately 300 crew members. Possibly fewer if they've automated systems. 300? Jalcor laughed bitterly. 300 humans are making fools of the entire Imperial fleet? Not just any 300, Kriash said carefully. These are descendants of the survivors. They've lived their entire lives on that ship. They've spent 2 centuries in the void, surrounded by death, knowing what happened to their species. They were raised for one purpose: vengeance. The room fell quiet at that. "What do they want?" the Emperor asked. "Unknown," Kriash admitted. "They've made no demands, sent no terms. They simply attack and disappear." "Then we hunt them down," Jalcor declared. "I will assemble a task force personally. 50 warships. We'll track this ghost and destroy it." "They survived the void," Kriash pointed out. "They've survived 200 years with limited resources, built weapons we didn't know they possessed, and they've adapted Imperial technology to their ship." Do you truly think 50 ships will be enough? Jalcor's scales flushed with anger. I ended humanity once, intelligence officer. I will do it again. After the meeting, Kriash returned to her office and sat in the dark, thinking. She called up the image of Captain Sarah Chen again, studied that face. Those eyes. What did it feel like, she wondered, to be the last of your kind? To know your entire species had been murdered? To spend your whole life preparing to make your killers pay? Kriash had always served the Empire without question. But now, for the first time, she wondered if the Empire deserved to be served. She thought about the gaps in the archives, the casual assumption that the Void would finish what the Empire had started, the billions of humans killed not in battle, but in systematic extermination. Her tablet chimed. Another attack. This time, the Retribution had destroyed a scientific outpost and transmitted a new message. This is for Earth. Kriash closed her eyes. The humans weren't just fighting, they were remembering. Each attack was a memorial for their dead world. And the Empire, she realized, had never even bothered to remember the worlds it destroyed. That night, Kriash made a decision that would change everything. She began compiling a secret file. Every detail about Imperial fleet movements, defensive positions, and strategic weaknesses. She didn't know if she'd ever use it. But if Captain Sarah Chen was fighting for the memory of her people, perhaps she deserved to fight with all the information available, even if that information came from the enemy. War Master Jalcor stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Imperial Fist, and surveyed his fleet. 50 warships, the pride of the Galaxian military, all under his command. This was Task Force Obliteration, and it had one mission: find the human battleship and finish what he had started 2 centuries ago. All ships report ready, War Master, his tactical officer announced. Jalcor nodded, satisfied. This was a force that could conquer entire star systems. One human ship, no matter how dangerous, couldn't stand against such overwhelming power. Begin the hunt, he commanded. But hunting the Retribution proved harder than anyone expected. The human ship seemed to know where Imperial forces would be before they arrived. Jalcor set a trap at a supply convoy route, hiding his fleet in a nearby nebula. The Retribution never appeared. Instead, it struck a fuel depot on the opposite side of the sector, destroying it before any ships could respond. He tried intercepting the humans at communication relay stations, reasoning they needed to know Imperial movements. But the Retribution avoided the relays entirely, hitting targets that seemed random until Kriash identified the pattern. They were all facilities involved in the original Purge Wars. The humans weren't just attacking the Empire. They were targeting everyone who had participated in humanity's destruction, piece by piece. They're using our own tactics against us, Jalcor's second-in-command observed after the 5th failed ambush. They wait for us to commit to a position, then strike somewhere else. Then we split the fleet, Jalcor decided. Smaller groups, faster response times. That's what they want, Kriash warned through the communication channel. She was monitoring the hunt from Imperial headquarters. A divided fleet is a vulnerable fleet. Your job is intelligence. Not strategy, Jalcor snapped. Stay in your lane, officer. The fleet divided into groups of 10 ships each, spreading across likely target zones. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then the Retribution appeared. It struck the smallest group, designated Hunter Squadron 5, near an asteroid mining operation. The attack came from within the asteroid field itself, the human ship emerging from between the rocks like a predator from tall grass. The battle lasted 8 minutes. The Retribution's weapons had evolved again. It used the asteroids as weapons, accelerating chunks of rock to incredible speeds with precisely targeted explosions. The makeshift projectiles smashed into Imperial ships, while the Retribution fired plasma beams from angles the Imperial formation couldn't cover. 3 ships were destroyed. 2 more were crippled. The human vessel took damage but escaped before reinforcements arrived, disappearing into the asteroid field where larger ships couldn't follow. "Regroup the fleet," Jalcor ordered through gritted teeth. All squadrons returned to central formation. But regrouping took time, and the Retribution used that time to strike 2 more isolated targets. The humans were bleeding his fleet slowly, methodically, like a surgeon making careful cuts. Meanwhile, across Imperial space, something unexpected was happening. The conquered species were watching. In the markets of a dozen worlds, workers whispered about the human ship. In the mines, slaves passed along stories of the ghost vessel that appeared from nowhere and vanished like smoke. On every planet, the Empire controlled through force. People spoke quietly about the impossible ship crewed by the last remnants of a dead species. Hope, Kriash realized, was spreading like a virus. The Empire had seemed invincible for so long, but the Retribution proved that resistance was possible, that even extinction could be survived with determination. Rebellion incidents increased by 15% across Imperial space. Nothing major yet, just small acts of defiance. But the pattern worried her. Aboard the Retribution, Captain Sarah Chen studied the tactical display with tired eyes. She hadn't slept properly in days. None of them had. "Damage report," she ordered. "Starboard armor plating compromised in sections 7 through 12, her chief engineer reported. He was a young man named Marcus, 3rd generation born on the ship. Like everyone aboard, war was the only life he knew. "Reactor efficiency down to 82%. We need to find resources soon or we'll lose main power." Sarah nodded. The Retribution wasn't designed for prolonged combat. It was a colony ship, modified and rebuilt over 2 centuries into a weapon of war. But it was still fundamentally a civilian vessel trying to fight military battles. "What about the crew?" she asked her medical officer. "Exhausted. We've been running combat operations for 6 weeks straight. People need rest." "We'll rest when we're done," Sarah said quietly. She pulled up an image on her personal screen. Earth, blue and green and beautiful, taken by one of the colony ships before the purge. She kept it there to remind herself why they fought. "Captain," her tactical officer called out. "I've identified the next target." Sarah walked over to study the data. It was a repair station, mid-sized, located near a major trade route. The facility's commander was listed in their database, Sub-Commander Throlix, who had commanded a bomber squadron during the Purge Wars. His bombers had hit civilian evacuation ships. "Confirmed," Sarah said. "Plot a course. We hit them tomorrow." But fate had other plans. The next day, as the Retribution approached the repair station, sensors detected something unexpected. Imperial ships, not a patrol group, but a major force, 20 warships, including Jalcor's flagship. "It's a trap," Marcus said immediately. "They leaked the station location. They wanted us to come here." Sarah studied the tactical situation. They were right. This was clearly a setup. The smart move was to retreat. Find another target. Keep up the guerrilla tactics. But the smart move wouldn't send a message. "Battle stations," she ordered. "All hands, prepare for engagement. Today we show them what one human ship can do." Her crew stared at her like she'd lost her mind. 20 Imperial warships against 1? It was suicide. "Captain, we can't win this fight," her second-in-command protested. "We don't need to win," Sarah replied calmly. "We need to survive, and we need to hurt them badly enough that they respect what we can do. Fear us or respect us, I don't care which. But they will learn that humanity doesn't run." The bridge fell silent. Then, one by one, her officers nodded and returned to their stations. These were the descendants of survivors. Running wasn't in their nature either. The retribution accelerated toward the Imperial fleet. Jalcor watched the human ship approach and couldn't believe it. They were actually coming to fight. Arrogance, he said with satisfaction. They think their hit-and-run victories make them invincible. Today they learn otherwise. All ships, combat formation. When they're in range, destroy them. The two forces closed. The retribution looked tiny compared to the Imperial fleet, a small dark shape against 20 massive warships. Then the human ship opened fire and chaos erupted. The retribution didn't fight like an Imperial vessel. It didn't maintain formation or follow predictable patterns. It moved like a living thing, accelerating and turning in ways that shouldn't be possible. Its inertial dampeners pushed beyond safety limits. Railgun projectiles and plasma beams lanced out at Imperial ships. The humans focused fire, targeting one ship at a time, overwhelming shields through concentrated damage. The first Imperial vessel exploded within 90 seconds of combat beginning. But 20 ships were too many. Plasma beams and missiles converged on the retribution from multiple angles. The human ship's shields flared and buckled, armor plating vaporized under sustained fire. "They're dying," Jalcor's tactical officer reported. "Good," the War Master said. "Focus all fire. Don't let them escape." But even as the retribution took catastrophic damage, it kept fighting, kept firing, kept moving. It was beautiful and terrible to watch, this last ship of a dead species refusing to go quietly into extinction. Another Imperial ship exploded, then another. The humans were taking 5 enemies with them into death. No, Jalcor realized, not 5. The retribution was positioning itself, moving toward... "All ships evade!" he screamed. "It's going to ram the flagship!" But his warning came too late. The retribution, burning and broken, its hull breached in a dozen places, accelerated directly toward the Imperial fist on a collision course. At the last moment, the human ship released every missile it had remaining and fired all weapons simultaneously at point-blank range. The Imperial fist's shields collapsed under the onslaught. Armor crumpled, systems failed. Then the retribution veered away, barely avoiding the collision, and jumped to faster-than-light speed, badly damaged, but still alive. Silence filled the Imperial fist's bridge. They had survived, but barely. And the retribution had escaped. Around them floated the wreckage of 6 Imperial warships. 6 vessels destroyed, 4 more heavily damaged, all from one human ship that should have died but refused to. Jalcor stared at the space where the retribution had vanished. For the first time in 200 years, he felt something he'd never expected to feel again: respect for humanity. The retribution drifted in the darkness between stars, running on minimal power. Emergency lights cast red shadows across the damaged corridors. The smell of burned circuits and leaking coolant filled the air. Captain Sarah Chen limped through the ship, checking on her crew. They'd survived the battle with Jalcor's fleet, but barely. 37 crew members dead, another 50 wounded. The ship itself was holding together through determination and spare parts. "We can't keep this up," Marcus told her bluntly. The engineer looked exhausted, his hands covered in burns from emergency repairs. "One more major battle and we're done." Sarah knew he was right, but stopping wasn't an option. Not yet. "How long until we're combat ready again?" she asked. 3 weeks minimum, maybe longer depending on what resources we can scavenge. Sarah nodded and continued her rounds, stopping to speak with each crew member. These were her people, the last humans in the galaxy. She knew every name, every face, every family connection. When someone died, it wasn't just a crew member lost. It was a piece of humanity erased forever. In the medical bay, she found Lieutenant James Park being treated for plasma burns. He'd stayed at his weapons station even after it caught fire, continuing to target Imperial ships until someone dragged him away. "How you feeling, Jim?" she asked. "Like I got too close to a star, Captain." He managed a weak smile. But I got 3 of them before my console died. 3 Imperial ships for Earth. 3 for Earth, Sarah repeated quietly. It had become their battle cry. Every small victory was dedicated to the dead world. Later, in her private quarters, Sarah sat alone and stared at the wall display. She'd divided it into 2 sections. One side showed Earth as it had been. Cities, oceans, forests, billions of people living their lives. The other side showed Earth now, a burned sphere, atmosphere stripped away, surface radioactive and dead. Between the images was a number that decreased every time they won a battle. 17. 17 more targets on her list, 17 facilities or ships or stations directly involved in the Purge Wars. When they were all destroyed, maybe then she could think about what came next. If they survived that long. Across Imperial space, the battle's results spread quickly despite official attempts at censorship. 6 warships destroyed by 1 human vessel. The legendary War Master Zhalkor barely escaping with his life. The story grew with each telling, becoming larger, more dramatic. On conquered worlds, workers in factories slowed their production. Miners in the deep excavations began small sabotages. Slaves whispered to each other, "If the humans could survive extinction, maybe we can survive too." Emperor Caxthor watched the reports with growing concern. The retribution was no longer just a military problem. It was becoming a symbol. "Broadcast more propaganda," one advisor suggested. "Remind the conquered species why they should fear us." "Fear isn't working," Kriash said quietly from her position at the intelligence briefing. "They already fear us. The retribution has given them something more powerful, hope." The Emperor's eyes fixed on her. "Explain." Kriash called up statistics on her display. "Rebellion incidents are up 30%. Productivity and forced labor operations is down across 12 sectors. We're seeing organized resistance movements forming on 7 worlds that were previously pacified. The pattern is clear. People are inspired by what one ship has accomplished." "Then we destroy that inspiration," Zhalkor growled. He was attending via hologram, his flagship still undergoing repairs. "I'm requesting permission to mobilize the entire 7th Fleet, 200 warships. We flood every sector with ships until we find the retribution and obliterate it." Emperor Caxthor considered this. 200 warships was a significant portion of the Empire's military strength. But if the alternative was spreading rebellion, "Granted," he said. "Find them. End this." Before the meeting ended, Kriash made her move. "Your Majesty, I request permission to attempt communication with the humans first." The room went silent. Everyone stared at her. "Communication?" Zhalkor's hologram flickered with his anger. "They're terrorists. We don't negotiate with terrorists." "They're survivors," Kriash corrected firmly. "And they're organized, disciplined, and clearly willing to die for their cause. Before we commit 200 warships to hunting 1 vessel, perhaps we should learn what they actually want." "They want revenge," the Emperor said. "What else is there to know?" "With respect, Your Majesty, we're assuming their goals. We haven't asked." Kriash pulled up the transmission from Captain Chen. "They've sent one message. No demands, no terms, just a statement of existence. What if they're waiting for us to open dialogue?" The Emperor studied her carefully. "You think they want something other than to die fighting us?" "I think they're survivors by nature. People who wanted to die would have done so already. Permission to reach out, Your Majesty. The worst that happens is they ignore me." After a long pause, the Emperor nodded. "You have 48 hours. If they don't respond, Zhalkor's plan proceeds." Kriash worked through the night, crafting her message carefully. It couldn't be official Imperial communication. That would be too formal, too easily rejected. It needed to be personal. She sent it on the same frequencies the Retribution had used, encrypted but not heavily. She wanted the humans to know this was a genuine attempt at contact. Captain Chen, my name is Intelligence Officer Kreash of the Calaxian Empire. I am not contacting you with official authority, but as someone who has studied what happened to your species. I have reviewed the archives from the Purge Wars. I have seen the records that were sealed. I know the truth of what was done to humanity. If you're willing to communicate, I'm willing to listen. If you have demands, I can bring them to the Emperor. If you want something other than endless war, perhaps there's a path forward. You have my word that any communication will be confidential unless you choose otherwise. Respond on this frequency if you're interested. She sent the message and waited, not knowing if it would even be received or if the humans would care. 3 days later, she got her answer. The response came through in text, simple and direct. Meet me. Coordinates attached. Come alone in an unarmed shuttle. If you bring weapons or backup, we'll know and you'll die. If you're genuine, we'll talk. Kreash stared at the coordinates. They indicated a location in a debris field, the remains of an old battlefield. It was risky. The humans could easily kill her. But it was also an opportunity. She didn't tell anyone, didn't file a flight plan. She simply took a small shuttle from the Imperial headquarters bay and flew toward the coordinates. Her heart pounding. When she arrived, the retribution was already there. Up close, it looked even more intimidating. The ship was a patchwork of repairs, scars from countless battles visible across its hull. But it was still functional, still dangerous. A docking tube extended toward her shuttle. A voice came over the radio. Dock and come aboard. Slowly. Kreash guided her shuttle into the docking tube. As she stepped out into the Retribution's airlock, armed humans in makeshift armor surrounded her. They searched her thoroughly, confiscated her communication devices, then led her through corridors that were cramped and utilitarian compared to Imperial designs. Everything was labeled in human languages she'd only seen in historical archives. The air smelled different, recycled through systems that were old but well-maintained. This was a ship that had been someone's home for generations. They brought her to a small conference room. Captain Sarah Chen was already there, waiting. The human looked older than in the broadcasts, with gray in her dark hair and lines of exhaustion around her eyes. But those eyes were sharp, intelligent, and filled with a carefully controlled anger. You actually came, Chen said. Either you're brave or you're desperate to end this war. Both, Kreash admitted. May I sit? Chen gestured to a chair. Kreash sat, acutely aware she was surrounded by people who had every reason to hate her species. I've read the full archives, Kreash began. I know what the Empire did to humanity. The civilian targets, the deliberate extermination, the— Stop, Chen interrupted. I don't need you to list our genocide for me. I live with it every day. Everyone on this ship is descended from survivors who watched their whole civilization burn. So skip the sympathy. Tell me why you're really here. Kreash took a breath. Because I think you want more than revenge. If you just wanted to die fighting, you would have accepted death in that battle with Shalkor. But you escaped. You're still fighting, which means you're fighting for something, not just against something. I want to know what that is. Chen was silent for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to a wall panel, pulling up an image. It showed a planet, green and blue, with white clouds swirling across its surface. But it wasn't Earth. This ship doesn't just carry weapons, Chen said quietly. It carries the genetic material of our entire species, frozen embryos, DNA samples, cultural archives. Everything needed to rebuild humanity from scratch. We're not just a battleship, we're an ark. Kreash felt her breath catch. Of course, survivors wouldn't just focus on revenge. They'd focus on continuity. You want a world, she said. We want what was taken from us, Chen replied. A planet where humans can exist again, where children can grow up under a real sun instead of recycled light, where our species has a future, not just a past. She turned to face Kree-Ash directly. The Empire tried to extinguish us. We refuse to be extinguished. Give us one world, acknowledge what was done to us, and we'll stop fighting. And if the Empire refuses? Chen's smile was cold. Then we'll keep bleeding you until someone else decides your empire isn't worth the cost. We've survived 200 years in the void. We can keep fighting for 200 more. Can your empire? Kree-Ash realized the truth in that moment. The Retribution couldn't win militarily, but they didn't need to. They just needed to survive long enough to inspire others. And judging by the rebellion reports, it was working. "I'll bring your terms to the Emperor," Kree-Ash said. "I can't promise he'll agree." "I know," Chen said. "That's why I'm giving you something else to bring him." She nodded to one of her officers who handed Kree-Ash a data chip. "That contains everything we've learned about Imperial weaknesses over 200 years, every tactical flaw, every strategic vulnerability, every system that can be exploited. If the Emperor refuses our terms, this information will be broadcast to every conquered species in Imperial space. We'll teach them all how to resist, how to fight, how to win." Kree-Ash looked at the data chip in her hand. It was a bomb more dangerous than any weapon. "You're threatening to start a galactic rebellion." "We're offering peace," Chen corrected. "The Emperor can choose to acknowledge one species' right to exist, or he can face dozens of species fighting for freedom. His choice." Kree-Ash left the Retribution with the data chip and a terrible decision ahead of her. She could deliver the message as requested, or she could warn the Empire about the threat and recommend preemptive action. As her shuttle flew back toward Imperial space, she thought about the human children she'd glimpsed in the ship's corridors, children born on a warship who'd never seen a real sky, who deserved the chance to live on a world. And she thought about all the other conquered species who deserved that same chance. When she reached Imperial headquarters, she knew what she had to do. She requested an immediate audience with Emperor Caxthor. It was time to see if the Empire could choose peace, or if it would only understand force. Emperor Caxthor listened to Kree-Ash's report in complete silence. When she finished, he sat motionless on his throne, thinking. The High Council waited, equally quiet, for his judgment. "They want a world," the Emperor finally said. "And in exchange for this world, they'll stop their attacks and keep their intelligence about our weaknesses secret." "Yes, Your Majesty," Kree-Ash confirmed. "And if we refuse, they'll share that intelligence with every conquered species, potentially starting rebellions across the entire Empire." "That is their threat, yes." Zhalkor stepped forward, his scales flushed with rage. "This is blackmail. We should never negotiate with terrorists, especially not humans we failed to fully exterminate. Send the 7th Fleet. Crush them. Search every system until we find their hiding place and finish this." "War Master," the Emperor said calmly. "How many ships have you lost hunting this one vessel?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Zhalkor's jaw tightened. 15 ships damaged or destroyed across multiple engagements." "And how many crew members?" "Approximately 2,000 casualties. 2,000 of our people dead, hunting 300 humans." The Emperor leaned forward. "Tell me, War Master, if we mobilize the entire 7th Fleet as you suggest, how many more will die before we succeed?" "However many it takes," Zhalkor insisted. "Your Majesty, these are humans, the species we already defeated. Showing them mercy now would make us look weak across the entire Empire." "We already look weak," Kree-Ash interjected quietly. "One human ship has been attacking us for months. Every conquered species is watching. They see us unable to stop 300 survivors. Granting the humans' request wouldn't make us look weak. It would make us look pragmatic, strong enough to choose peace when it serves us. Or it makes us look desperate," another council member argued. If we give the humans a world, every other species will demand the same. Emperor Caxthor stood from his throne and walked to the massive window overlooking the capital city. Billions of beings lived below, representing hundreds of species, all subjects of the Empire, all conquered. Intelligence Officer Kriash, he said without turning, in your assessment, will the humans actually broadcast their intelligence if we refuse? Yes, Your Majesty. Captain Chen was very clear. She's willing to die for her species' future, but if she must die, she'll ensure the Empire pays the maximum price. And do you believe their intelligence is genuinely valuable? Kriash thought about the data chip in her possession. She'd analyzed parts of it already. The humans had indeed spent 2 centuries studying every aspect of Imperial military operations. Their insights were disturbingly accurate. I believe it could cause significant damage if widely distributed, yes. The Emperor turned to face his council. Then we appear to have 2 choices. Grant their request and face potential demands from other species, or refuse and face potential rebellion across multiple fronts. He paused. Unless there's a third option no one is seeing. No one spoke. The options were clear, and neither was good. Your Majesty, Kriash said carefully, may I suggest that granting the humans' request could actually strengthen the Empire? All eyes turned to her. She continued, currently, we rule through fear and force. Every conquered species knows that resistance means extermination. But what if we showed that surrender and cooperation can lead to peaceful coexistence? The humans would become an example of a different path. You're suggesting we use them as propaganda, the Emperor said, understanding immediately. I'm suggesting we use them as proof that the Empire can be merciful. That species who accept imperial authority can thrive rather than merely survive. It transforms the humans from martyrs into partners. Partners. Jalcor spat the word like poison. After everything they've done? After everything we did, Kriash corrected. We started this war, War Master. We killed their entire civilization. They responded with 1 ship. In a strange way, their restraint is remarkable. The debate raged for hours. Finally, Emperor Caxthor made his decision. Prepare a response to Captain Chen. We will grant their request with conditions. The message was sent on encrypted channels. The Empire acknowledges the events of the Purge Wars and recognizes humanity's right to exist. We offer the planet designated New Haven in the frontier reaches. It is habitable, uninhabited, and will be granted to humanity as sovereign territory. In exchange, all hostilities cease immediately, and the intelligence you've gathered remains confidential. You have 48 hours to respond. Aboard the Retribution, Sarah Chen read the message 3 times before she believed it. Her hands shook slightly as she called her senior staff together. They agreed, she told them simply. The room erupted. Some crew members cheered. Others wept. Lieutenant Park, still bandaged from his burns, just stared in disbelief. It's a trap, Marcus said immediately. It has to be. They lure us to this planet and hit us with everything they have. Maybe, Sarah admitted. But if there's even a chance this is real, we have to take it. We're down to 30% combat effectiveness. We can't survive another major battle. And, she paused, looking at her exhausted crew. These children deserve to see a real sky. The vote was unanimous. They would accept the Empire's offer, but carefully. 3 weeks later, the Retribution limped into orbit around New Haven. The planet was beautiful. Blue oceans, green continents, white polar caps. It looked heartbreakingly like Earth. Imperial ships were already in orbit, but they maintained distance, weapons powered down. A shuttle approached, carrying Kriash and official Imperial representatives. The meeting took place in neutral space, aboard a hastily constructed station. Sarah Chen faced Emperor Caxthor directly for the first time via holographic communication. Captain Chen, the Emperor said, I want you to understand something. I'm not doing this because I fear your ship. I could destroy you with overwhelming force if I chose. I'm doing this because I'm tired of unnecessary wars. And I want you to understand something, Emperor, Sarah replied coldly. We would have fought to the last person. You might have won eventually, but the cost would have haunted your empire for generations. This isn't mercy. This is mathematics. Perhaps, the Emperor conceded. Regardless, the planet is yours. We will withdraw all Imperial presence from the system. You have sovereignty over New Haven and the space immediately surrounding it. In return, you will cease all hostile actions against Imperial targets. Agreed, Sarah said. But know this. We'll be watching. If the Empire ever threatens another species with extinction, we'll share everything we know. We'll arm the oppressed. We'll teach them to resist. Consider us the galaxy's insurance policy against genocide. The Emperor's expression was unreadable. Noted. Do we have an accord? We have an accord. The formal treaty was signed. The Imperial fleet withdrew, and slowly, carefully, the Retribution descended toward New Haven's surface. Sarah stood on the ship's observation deck, watching the planet grow larger as they descended. For the first time in her life, she was going to stand on soil that wasn't the deck of a spaceship. Around her, crew members gathered, equally amazed. Some were crying, others just stared in wonder. The children pressed their faces against the windows, seeing their first real planet. "Prepare for landing," Sarah ordered quietly. "Take us home." The Retribution settled onto a grassy plain beside a clear river, surrounded by forests and mountains. When the airlock opened and the ramp extended, Sarah was the first to step out. The air was real. The breeze was real. The sun warming her face was real. She knelt down and pressed her hands into the soil, feeling it between her fingers. Behind her, 300 humans emerged from the ship that had been their world for so long, stepping onto a planet they could actually call home. "This is for Earth," Sarah whispered, tears finally falling. "For everyone we lost, for everyone who didn't survive to see this day, we made it. We're still here." Years passed. New Haven flourished. The frozen embryos were awakened. Children were born under an open sky. The population grew from 300 to 3,000, then 30,000. Humans built cities and farms, schools and spaceports. They remembered Earth, but they built something new. The Retribution remained in orbit, transformed from warship to monument. It circled New Haven endlessly, a reminder of what humanity had survived and what they'd been willing to do to survive. Across the galaxy, other conquered species noticed. If humans could negotiate sovereignty, perhaps they could too. Peaceful independence movements spread. The Empire, recognizing the danger of more violent conflicts, began granting limited autonomy to cooperative species. The balance of power shifted slowly but inevitably. The Empire still existed, but it ruled differently now, less through fear and more through pragmatic partnership. Kriash, promoted to High Council for her role in the negotiations, occasionally visited New Haven. She walked through human cities and marveled at how quickly they'd rebuilt. Sarah Chan, older now and officially retired from military service, would meet her sometimes. "Do you regret it?" Kriash asked during one visit. "The war, the violence, all those battles?" Sarah looked at the children playing in a nearby park, human children who would never know the inside of a warship as home. "I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret fighting for this, for them. Every species deserves the right to exist, to have a future. We just had to remind the galaxy of that truth. By threatening to destroy the Empire. By refusing to let our extinction be accepted quietly," Sarah corrected. "We were the Empire's worst fear not because we were strong, but because we wouldn't die. Because we survived when survival should have been impossible. and in surviving, we proved that extinction isn't inevitable. That resistance matters, that one ship, 300 people, and enough determination can change the galaxy. She smiled slightly. The Empire's worst fear wasn't a human battleship emerging from the void. It was the idea we represented, that no one is truly conquered until they accept conquest. We never accepted it, and now neither does anyone else. Kriash looked at the monument to the Retribution in the city square, where Sarah's statue stood alongside the names of every crew member who died in the war. "You changed everything," she said quietly. "No," Sarah replied, watching the children play. "We just refused to let everything change us. That's different." Above them, the Retribution continued its eternal orbit, silent guardian of the world below. The last human warship, preserved forever as a reminder of what the last humans had accomplished. They had emerged from the void against impossible odds. They had fought against overwhelming power, and they had won not through superior strength, but through unbreakable will. Humanity had returned to the galaxy, and this time, they were home to stay.